everyone. Once again, welcome to this Facebook live session on my interpretation of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen R. Covey. Thank you for joining today and your time and your continued support. I'd like to thank you all also for such an amazing response and feedback on the episode 1, which was the introductory episode. I received a barrage of messages and emails from many, and once again, thank you very much. Many who know me personally and in my personal network were sharing their thoughts over Messenger, and it didn't stop buzzing for 2 days. I'm glad that I was able to create an impact, however small it may be, and I hope I'll be able to continue to do so. For those who are joining us for the first time today and didn't see the first episode, you can see it in the video section of my page. And we'll also do a quick review at the beginning of today's episode. Also sharing a quick background on me. As you all already know by now, my name is Rashie Sinha and I'm a business consultant, coach and trainer. I come with 20 years of experience. I started my corporate journey 2 decades ago, and over the years have worked with multiple organizations where my key mandate was to launch new business or verticals. I always had the revenue responsibility as part of my KRA. Such a role helped me with the right exposure on business growth strategy, and it soon became my core strength. Such a role also meant that I had to lead drafting of SOPs, that is standard operating procedure, and train people on various aspects of business. Hence, coaching and training became an extension of my work. Thus, here I am digging into my key strengths and working towards building growth for my clients. Today, I work with multiple businesses and help them define and structure new revenue generating streams, or help them tweak their current business working to create fast-paced growth. Well, this is me in short. If you wish to know more, you could head to LinkedIn and check my profile over there. Well, again, just as a quick thought, I am always asked, why do I talk about this book so often and so frequently? I'm always quoting from this book because I believe this book has a very important hand in my personal growth as a professional. And I've gone back to this book multiple times in past, and each time I had a new takeaway. Hence, I highly recommend that you make notes through the series and also read the book if you can. If you must, in fact, I would suggest that this should be part of your personal book collection. So in the series again, this is what I'm going to talk about. This is the book, and what are we going to cover today? So this is what we'll cover. The series is spread over 9 episodes, and this is how it looks. We started with the introduction and how we dive into the habits. The episode 1 was all about preparing, about understanding the habits better. And today we would be starting with habit number 1. Also, by end of each episode, there will be a take action point or a task to do which needs to be worked on before the next episode. Once again, I'd highly recommend that you sit with a pen and notebook to take notes and to maintain a journal. Yes, I'm kind of old school like that. So this these entire series actually is created with a specific thought in mind. And as you can see, each section deals with a particular element related to our personality. This is a snapshot of the content or the index section of the book. So like I mentioned earlier, today we'll talk about habit number 1, which is be proactive. This is the chapter which comes under the section of private victory. So here is a quick recap of what we had done before we get into the details of habit number 1. So we had started the previous episode where we spoke about personality ethics, went on to talk about character ethics. We introduced the concept of paradigm and then moved to paradigm shift. And of course, just to do a quick review once again, paradigm is about the way you look at things, our point of view, and that can change. And then we went on to talk about principles. Principles are something which govern the key factor or the core of our life. Paradigm can shift, they change over a period of time, but principles are core and fundamental to being itself, to living itself, and principles never change. So we discussed the examples of paradigm and principles. Like I gave an example that principle is not our core thinking or religion or curt political views. It is not about also about the values, and that is where we discussed the example of a group of thieves. They can have you know common values, but then they are against the basic principle of life itself, which is having integrity, being trustworthy, being sincere. Then we went ahead and spoke about these 7 habits and overview of the 7 habits. And today, when we talk about the habit number 1, so that is what makes me very excited, because this is where we launch straight into the 7 habits. So again, the key word over here is habits. So we had covered this in our previous episode. However, I thought we should revisit this part. So the author in the book defines habit as it is an intersection of knowledge, skill, and desire. The book had an interesting explanation to it, and it was explained with an example, which was, I might be ineffective with my colleagues, family, friends, because I'm constantly trying to tell them what to do. I don't listen to them. I might know that to be effective, I need to even listen to them and not just keep talking. So I have the knowledge. However, I may not have the skill to be a listener, or maybe I don't want to listen to anyone. When I'm able to manage all 3 of them, I will become effective, and that is how habits are formed. With the right habit, we learn to be productive and effective, and the right effectiveness is achieved by the support of those around us. So the diagram which we had shared in the previous episode is the seed to understanding how habits pan out and create an impact. We humans by nature are interdependent. As an interdependent person, I have an opportunity to share myself deeply, meaningfully with others, and I have access to the vast resources and potential of other human beings. However, being truly interdependent is a choice only independent people can make. Dependent people cannot become interdependent as they don't own themselves enough. So what will they offer? And this is where these 7 habits come into the picture. It makes you truly interdependent. So the entire set of habits are divided into various sections, where in the initial part of the 3 habits, we work on self. This diagram explains how we would be moving ahead. This is where it's explained that how to move from being dependent to independent, and developing the first 3 habits will help us through what the section I showed earlier, the private victory. And then we would move to the next level. So the first habit we are going to talk about is be proactive, which is take responsibility for your life, take responsibility for your own actions. So in the book, the section starts with the heading Principles of Personal Vision. there is an important, in fact, this is something, principles of personal vision is something important to take care and practice. While working on these habits, we need to stand apart from ourselves, which means look at ourselves as separate person. I know what I'm saying may not make a bit of sense and could be difficult for some. So here, what I'm going to do right now is do a quick exercise. So be with me in this moment as of now, and I'll stop the screen share for a bit. So what are we going to do right now? So there is the exercise. Imagine you're sitting in a room by yourself with no noise around you. There is no distraction. Now imagine that there is another person in the room sitting or standing at the other corner of the room. Look closer at that person. That person is you. Now imagine all the qualities, physical characteristics of the person. The other person, he or she is your mirror image. Okay, so can you imagine that person who is a mirror image of you standing in the room at the other corner? Now let's try something. Think about the mood you are in right now at this very moment. You don't have to share it with me. Just think about the mood you are in. Write that in your notebook. Can you actually identify with the mood, or you're thinking, what mood am I in? And you have to really dig in. So then understand, ask yourself, what are you feeling right now? And how would you describe your present mental state? Now think about these for a minute. Think about what mood are you in? Can you identify that mood? What are you feeling? And how would you describe your present mental state? Now tell me, in fact, write down or understand, how is your mind working right now? As in, is it quick and alert, or is it lethargic and laid back? Or when I'm asking you these questions, are you doing this exercise with me as in real time? Or you're torn between doing the exercise and thinking and rushing ahead to think what I'm trying to get at, or what I'm trying to evaluate here, right? Either of the two could be true. Remember, there are no right or wrong to the above question. It is about you, and it is about a personal feeling. What is important for you is to realize who you are. What do you feel? For that is what will define what to do about it. All right. Do you realize that when we do such things, or what we did right now is actually uniquely human? Animals don't possess this ability. This exercise has a name. This is what we call becoming self-awareness, or the exercise of self-awareness. This quality is what lets us learn from others' experience, evaluate things, and this is why we can make or break our habits. Now imagine the way the author is explaining the seat of things, explaining the basics, so we are able to move ahead and imbibe these habits truly. Certain things that we need to know are, we are not our feelings. We are not our moods. We are not even our thoughts. Self-awareness enables us to stand apart and examine the way we see ourselves, our self-paradigm. This is what most fundamental paradigm of effectiveness is all about. This is what affects our attitude, behavior, and even how we see other people. If we are not self-aware, our ability to relate with others and our personal potential becomes limited and can have a direct impact on our growth and success. When we are not working in the area of self-awareness, Our vision of ourselves come from what others say about us, their perception of the social paradigms. In other words, in the absence of self-awareness, we work on something called, and a very interesting word, which is social mirror. Interesting introduction to the word, right? Have you seen or heard of a mirror in a mela? So I'm sure most of us have been to some kind of a local mela, and there is a room which is filled with mirrors. We see, when we enter there, we just see reflection. You know what? Social mirror is something like that. Our view of ourselves is governed by reflections of others. What happens? We may have heard this statements like, "You are always late. Why can't you understand such simple things, you tube light? You argue a lot. You must be a lawyer." Aren't these some very common statements that we hear all around us? We ourselves may have used some of them. I am guilty of them. I have. These are what we call projections. Larger than life, out of proportion description of a person. They generally project the weakness of the other person. This is not a true reflection of the person in question. A reflection of social paradigm tells us that we are largely a product of conditioning and conditions around us. We have discussed conditioning when we brought it up in an environment with certain set of thinking is conditioning. The most common example of this is boys don't cry, or pink is a girly color. Yes, conditioning has a great power in our lives. However, when we start believing that it defines us and that we have no control over it, then there is something to be looked at. We build something called as social maps. The author goes on to explain the 3 different types of maps. However, we will talk about the base of such map or deterministic approach in our life. So all such maps are based on something called the stimulus and response theory. So, one second. So when we are talking about the stimulus and response theory, what I immediately get reminded of is the Pavlov's experiment with dogs. I'm sure many of you would have heard it. So quickly, here is the story. So what had happened is a dog was put through an experiment where he was put in a room, and at a certain time, a bell was rung. And when the bell was rung, he was offered food. After a period of time, when the bell would ring, the dog would expect food. His his tail will start wagging, and things like that. He would have a saliva formation because food is right in front of the dog, right? Then to the point where the experiment was further carried out, the bell was rung, there was no food, yet the dog had the saliva formation in his mouth, and that went on for quite a while. This is what we call the stimulus and the response. The bell acted as the stimulus, and the saliva formation in the mouth of the dog was the response associated with it. The basic idea is that we are conditioned, all of us, we are conditioned to respond to a particular situation in a particular way to a particular stimulus. The author over here continues with another story, and he shares the amazing story of a person called Frankel. Frankel was raised in the tradition of what with the basic understanding that whatever happens to you as a child shapes your character and personality and basically governs your entire life. The parameters of your lives are fixed and set. You don't do much about it. In fact, you can't do much about it. So this was the tradition and thinking Frankl was brought up with. As an adult, he was a psychiatrist, and by birth, he was a Jew. And he got imprisoned and sent to the Nazi death camp. His entire family perished at the camp. Every moment, he didn't know what will happen next to him. Will he be sent to the gas chamber, or would he be the lucky one to live but would have the task to remove the dead bodies? He suffered torture and extreme abuse. But one day, alone and naked in a small room, he began to become aware of what he later termed as the last of human freedoms. A freedom no one, not even his Nazi captors, could take away. Well, of course, they could control his environment, do what they wished to his body, but his basic identity was with him, intact. He became self-aware to be able to look at his own situation as an observer. Again, when we started the session, we spoke about having another person in the room who is your mirror image, who can observe you, or you can observe that person as an external observer. That is what Frankl was able to achieve alone in that dark room. The stimulus was same. However, now his response to it was his choice. He had the freedom to choose the way he would respond to the stimulus, and that freedom was something no one could take away. So now we go back to the diagram which I had just shared about stimulus and response. You can see stimulus is on one side and response on another, because there's something which comes in between them, and that is freedom to choose. I'll give you 2 seconds to take this in. So yes, freedom is the factor which defines us, and that comes from self-awareness, and that is what would decide how I respond to a situation. Here I would like to share a personal story. So I stay in New Delhi, and city has its own share of rash drivers who cut lanes, suddenly come in front of you or overtake you dangerously. There was a time I would get really upset and angry at such drivers, at times chase them and give them a piece of my mind, or ensure to take them and teach them a lesson. Yes, that was me once upon a time. So one day I was driving with a friend of mine who I really look up to. We were having some fun conversations, and then it happened again. A vehicle changed lanes and overtook my car dangerously. My immediate reaction was to get angry and, say, what an idiot. This guy doesn't know how to drive. You know what my friend did? My friend asked me to let go. She said, you cannot control that person's behavior. What you can control is your own behavior and reaction to it. And I was like, how can you do that? He just behaved like this. This happens, that happened, and I cribbed. And I was like, it is affecting me because, if that vehicle could have hit me and all of that. Her response again, it didn't, right? So then she taught me a small way of taking care of such a situation. She said, Rashie, whenever a vehicle overtakes you dangerously or changes lane like this, and it kind of is sudden, then just think one thing, that probably the person sitting in the car has an emergency because of a nature's call. So that's why the person is rushing and has to attend to the nature's call. When you think like that, you would automatically become calm. And you know what? I started laughing when she shared that. How can I think about somebody wanting to go to bathroom because they have cut across in front of me? But then it worked. Now, every time when I'm driving, these things continue to happen. There are people at times who overtake. And when that happens, instead of reacting, I think of what my friend has said and smile. So this is what a choice I made, that how I would respond to a stimulus, because we all have the freedom to choose our reaction. Now, this is the place where author introduces us uh, to proactivity while explaining the proactive model. Now, this model in front of your screen is the proactive model, where we have the choice to choose, the freedom to choose a reaction or response to a stimulus. So now what does proactivity mean? It basically means we are responsible for our own lives. Our behavior is a function of our decisions, not our conditions. So the key word over here is responsibility, which is responsibility, which is the ability to choose your response is in my hand. And highly proactive people recognize that responsibility. They do not blame circumstances, conditions, or conditioning for their behavior. Their behavior is a product of their own conscious choice, free of conditioning. They don't say, I can't help it. This is the way I respond. But being proactive is a basic nature to humans. And we have chosen to let conditions and conditioning govern our lives. When we make such choices of letting conditioning and circumstances govern our behavior, we become something called reactive. Now, reactive people are often affected by their physical environment. If the weather is good, they feel good. If it isn't, it affects their attitude and performance. Basically, reactive people do not take responsibility. There's always someone else or something else who's responsible, and they would blame that person. They're always looking for an external part to put the blame on. So let's look at the language reactive people use. So if somebody is constantly saying there is nothing I can do, or that's just the way I am, he or she makes me so mad. But you know what? They won't allow this to happen. Or to say, I will have to do that. It's like, no, I can't. Or if only. Then when we are using such kind of a language, this is what we call a reactive language. And you know what? It is in our control to change the language. Because when we try and attempt changing the language itself, then other things start happening, because that is when we start reflecting on our choices, on our behavior. So what can we do to change this? What can we say instead? So the proactive language would be that instead of saying there's nothing I can do, we can say, let's look at the alternatives. This is just the way I am. Well, I can choose a different approach. That person makes me so mad. I control my own feelings. I choose to be mad at that person, right? They won't allow that. Well, I can create an effective presentation. So when you are stuck with a situation where you feel there is a roadblock and you feel something will not be allowed or something would not be entertained, you as a person can either accept that going down or try and create an effective alternative or find an alternative, either of the two. You can choose an appropriate response to a situation and a particular stimulus, because it's not about I can't, it is about I choose. It is not about I must, it is about I prefer. It is not about if only, it is about I will. Another way to become more self-aware regarding our own degree of proactivity is to look at where we focus our time and energy on. So this is where the author introduces us to two new areas. One is circle of concern and the other is circle of influence. Now, what does this mean? You know what? We all have wide range of concerns. You know, our concern are our health, our children, problem at work. We are even concerned about the national GDP, the nuclear war, the Cold War. Why is it so cold on North Pole? What do we do about the traffic situation in Bangalore, etc., etc.? There are few things that concern us directly and some don't. There are some where we can and should do something about, right? Now, this is where we get introduced to a diagram, which is this: a circle of concern and a circle of influence. So the things that concern us directly, and there are things where we can and should do something about, is the circle of influence. So as the diagram says, and we can see, our circle of concern is generally bigger than the circle of influence. So where we spend more time defines our proactivity. Do we spend more time in the area or circle of concern where we don't have influence? That is a question we need to ask ourselves. We need to work in a matter that we are able to increase our circle of influence. So that is the area where we need to work on. And how would that look? These are two diagrams. The one on your right side, reactive focus, is the one which I showed earlier, where your circle of concern is much bigger than circle of influence. In that sense, what we are doing is we are playing with negative energy. Whereas in the other diagram, we can see when we work with the positive mindset, a circle of influence becomes larger and larger, and we are able to win over many things and ensure that the circle of concern grows smaller. So it is great to have a positive mindset, as it helps enlarge the circle of influence, and that is what makes us more proactively. Basically, we need to spend our time and effort in area and things where we can do something about it. All right. The situation of electricity in my city is really bad, and you know, every 2 hours there's no electricity. Can I do much about it? No. My car is not working well and it needs servicing, and it can kind of conk off anytime, even when I'm trying to go for a meeting. Can I do something about it? Yes. Which one should I concentrate on? Of course, something which is in my control. When we are working in the zone of circle of concern, we are governed by circumstances. क्या करें, कुछ नहीं हो सकता, I can't do anything, and feel that we have no control on situation and the outcome. It is only and only when we concentrate on and work on a circle of influence, when we work on our paradigms and paradigm shift, create positive energy, that is when we become more productive. So before we totally shift our focus to a circle of influence, we need to understand few things. Yes, we need to move towards circle of influence. However, there is something called consequences and mistakes. We have the power to choose our actions, but we are not free to choose the consequences. Consequences are governed by natural law. I have the choice to be unethical in my business. The consequence of being unethical in my business is not in my hand. It is governed by the natural law. That is why we spoke about principles in the beginning, in the introduction session, and how important they are. So, or another example, we can decide to stand in front of a fast moving train. Okay, that's a choice one can make. However, we can't decide what happens to the body when the train hits us, right? So there is a smart practice that I follow in my personal life. So whenever I am at that crossroad where I need to take a decision, I always envision the worst case scenario. Basically meaning that when I'm making a choice, I look at the possibility or the consequences associated with it. If I am okay with the worst consequence associated with my decision and I can deal with that, I go ahead and do that, because then there is no fear. I do that particular act with full conviction and full heart. I am never looking at what if. Even if things go wrong, I am prepared for the worst case because I have envisioned it already. I have thought about it and I've said it's okay. Yes, I want the best case scenario to happen. However, I have taken into consideration all the possible consequences. We, like I mentioned right now, we spoke about the principles along with paradigm in the first episode. As long as a behavior is governed by principles, positive outcome and consequences can be expected. Violating the principle will bring negative consequences. However, there's something else. There is some space that we have over here, which is mistakes. We can make mistakes, and it is important to know that it's okay to make mistakes. Instead of beating ourselves or having regrets about it, we have the choice to start over, learn from our mistakes, and do better the next time. So, at the very heart of increasing a circle of influence is keeping our promises and commitments to self and to others. Another important point over consequences and mistakes is have the bigger picture in mind. And when we have a larger picture in mind, paradigm and paradigm shift become important. We become lighter on our feet, and it is easy for us to imbibe habits and accept people and circumstances and make the right choices. Now, this brings me to the exercise of the week. I understand it is not easy to make this shift. So I challenge you to try the principle of proactivity for next 1 week till we meet again next Sunday. So list out your circle of influence and work only in that area. There could be 1,000 things you may think about every day and say this could be done this way, this could be done that way. Can you change it? If yes, then it comes under your circle of influence. If no, for now, keep it aside. Don't think about it. Don't waste your time on it. And the best way to work on your circle of influence is make small commitments to self and keep them. Understand what we need to become. We need to become the support, not the judge. Be a value add, not a critique. Be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Try being proactive at various places. Try it in your marriage, with your family, your children. Try it at your workplace. Look at others' weakness with compassion. From now onwards, make a promise to yourself that you won't crib. So don't crib, work at making things better. The circle of influence. And of course, write to me if you're stuck and do share your experience of the week and support each other. Quickly, here is where I can be reached. I have always suggested best is to write an email to me, because that is something which gets checked regularly. So that's better than leaving a comment. And before we close the session today, something I would like to share with you as a closing thought. Knowing that we are responsible, able, is fundamental to effectiveness and to every other habit that we will discuss ahead in the coming episodes. So thank you very much for your time once again today. Please write to me at my email IDs as mentioned over here, which is rashie.sinha@gmail.com or rashie@theyellowcarcompany.com. And I will be definitely responding to all your messages. I've been doing it last week. Sorry to those people who wrote to me after Friday afternoon. I have not been able to respond to your emails till now, which I would be doing latest by tomorrow morning. So please write to me and you will receive a response from me within 24 to 36 hours. And that's a promise. Thank you and see you again next week, same time at 3:30 for episode number 3 and talking about habit number 2. Have a nice evening. Have a nice evening.